Hello everyone, my name's Tina Schenk. I'm a lawyer by training, but I now am a musician. And I realized that there is a lot of things musicians don't know about copyright, so I have made this series for you. Do also check out part 1, what is copyright, and part 2, what your rights are. You'll find them at Music Weeklies. This month's MUI webinars is going to be about how you can use other people's music. And it's given to you by Music Weekly's Challenge, so check us out on Twitter. You'll find details at the end of the slideshow. Now, I realize a lot of people use other people's music and they probably didn't pay a license for it, and they probably didn't know that they had to. And so I set up this little allegory for you to understand the principle behind what the thing is. It's a very simple storyline, so pay attention. Here's a person who is hungry and their kid's hungry and they want to bake bread to feed themselves and their kids. So they do. And then it's in the oven. And then this other person comes and takes it. And that person isn't hungry, doesn't need to eat it, but just takes it because they want to. And then gives it away for free because he's not hungry, but these other guys are, and they really all appreciate it, so they like him. So that's our little story, and I'm sure you can see that this could be transferred to a composer writing something, then putting it out there, or in the oven, or it's ruminating, or they're ruminating, and then someone else swoops in and takes their idea and gives it away. And this person that takes it may not want any money for it, but it still doesn't make it right, because the right of that tune or bread was the person who made it, has the right to that. So just think of this idea. Actually using other people's music is principally the same, even if you don't want to make money off it. So if you want to perform a cover, you need to determine if it's going to be a public performance or a private performance. If it's public, you need to license it or get permission from the original creator. If it's private, you don't need permission or license, but it should be tied to a home situation and small groups of people. So if you have a party with 30 people, that might be considered public, or it might be considered private. And that's up to the rules in your country. But I would say, as long as you know everyone there and it's in a home, it's a private scenario. So here are examples of performances that need licenses. You have tribute concerts, who pay tribute to someone. They need to license their music first, or the piece in question first. At weddings, for instance, weddings are considered public performance in most countries, apart from maybe if it's a 5-person wedding in your home again. Anything that is commercial will need a license or permission. And this whole thing often coincides with the fact that if the musician gets or should get paid for the performance, let's say in a wedding, then you need a license. Even if it's you singing at your sister's wedding, which I already did numerous times, then it does need a license. So how do you obtain a license for covers, for the performance of covers? If someone else composed the piece, you do need it. So how and when do you need to obtain a license? It's very easy. If someone else composed the piece, you need to obtain a license, apart from those very private scenarios. You get that license through the relevant national PRO or copyright collective, which I will be calling it moving on from here. If the creator isn't registered with a copyright collective, then you have to obtain the permission from the original creator. But just so you know, it's not enough to get permission from the original creator if they are in fact registered with a copyright collective. You actually need permission and license from that copyright collective. And here is a price example of what it costs. If you have a wedding with 100 participants and no entrance fee, it'll cost you currently 657 kroner, which is 67 euro or 74 US dollars in January 2020. Now, what if you want to distribute a cover online? You really need, this is different than performance, because for distributing, you are kind of fixating the version, so it's not an ephemeral performance. And all use of any composition needs a license or a permission. License from a copyright collective or permission from the original creator if they're not registered. That means you can't just make a cover of your favorite video game's main theme on piano, for instance. You actually need a license for that. Here's a price example again from Norway, where I live. Distributing a cover costs 12% of the turnover for streaming. There are a few exceptions, which is non-commercial public interests, like for instance parody, which is considered social commentary in this regard, and for educational purposes. So a music school doesn't have to pay a license to have students perform pieces of other composers. There's also public domain, and this varies a lot with countries. What is public domain? And then there is everything that's marked royalty-free, which should be cleared with a composer already. If it's not, you may end up with a problem. But if you go to stock sites like Pond5 or Envato, then this is cleared with a composer. A few countries have something called safe harbor rules, which means that a distributor or a service provider doesn't bear any liability, but this is only really in very few countries and is only really within Anglo-American legal systems, not in the UK, but in, for instance, the US and Australia. So if you are a service provider, you won't bear any responsibility for other people distributing covers with you. But in the rest of the world, this is a problem, which means, for instance, that Music Weeklies can get in trouble if you write a cover for our weekly challenge. Now we move on to how you can use a specific recording. And generally speaking, by international law, all sound recordings are protected. And if that means you always need to get a license. And if music is tagged with ISRC, International Standard Recording Code, it needs a license from the copyright collective. If it doesn't have an International Standard Recording Code, you need permission from the original creator and lyricist, if there is one. Again, the exceptions are related to non-commercial public interests. If you want to add a specific recording to video, you have to obtain a sync license, which you obtain from the publisher or the label or the game owner, etc., and the original creator. This, as far as I can tell, is a type of license that you don't obtain with the National Copyright Collective. But all other licenses are obtained from the National Copyright Collectives. And the permission, as I stated before, can only be granted if they're not registered, if the composer is not registered with a copyright collective. So now we move on to sampling. And don't forget, samples are specific recordings. So it's the same rules as we just went through for using other people's recordings. This also goes for when the sample is totally unrecognizable, because this is a matter of principle. Someone else actually owns that performance, and it's not your right to actually use it. So even if you flipped it, time stretched it to 200 times, then chopped it down to 1/16th, and use it in 3 octaves lower register than the original, and then reversed it, even then you need a license. Now, to obtain a license for recording, for instance, to use as background music or as a sample, here's a price example from the Copyright Collective in Norway that has to do with recordings, Gramo. A one-off live event is 500 kroner, which is approximately €50 or $56 in January 2020. So we move to the question of liability. Copyright lasts for different times around the world, and it's based on the country of origin of the composition or the publication of that composition. So, for instance, in the US, they have a much longer protection time than in other countries that maybe have 50 years. So in the US, I think it is a set date. Before a certain date, you can freely use things, but after a certain date, it's not free. I'm not exactly sure what the actual rule is, but outside of the country of origin, though, according to international treaties, the protection varies from country to country. So something that's public domain in, say, Norway may not be public domain in the US, because Norway has a shorter protection time than the US. Here is a list of different countries' copyright lengths, protection time, and I'll put this link in the description of this talk as well, so you can find it there. The international law situation is dealing with principles only, so the actual detail and the penalties and how this works varies with countries. So you need to check with your local copyright collective, for instance. Here are some examples of penalties. In the US, you can expect to pay between $200,000 and $150,000 and potentially go to jail. And in the UK, it's up to £50,000 and up to 6 months in prison. This was in 2016, this in the lower courts. So it's also going to be higher the higher up in the court ladder you come. And yes, check with your national copyright collective for all this information. Now, the internet has developed its own set of customs. For instance, rearranging video games, soundtracks, for instance, on piano. And here is the note I want to make on that. The fact that other people are doing it has no legal basis for exemption. It means you can still get into trouble. It means you still should pay a license or get permission from the original creator. And the fact that a copyright holder has lots of money has also no legal basis for exemption. So you can still get in a lot of trouble. Additionally, that can actually cost you a lot of money. So beware of this. Covers, especially while they flourish on the internet, it's not actually legal. And that was the information that I had this time. I'm sorry if it was a bit lengthy and with a lot of pointers, but I wanted to be very specific this time. Thank you for listening. You can find me at Twitter at Tinelinen, and you can find Music Weeklies Challenge at Music Weeklies. So do come and see us there. If you're a composer, you should absolutely join our community. It's very friendly and we want to hear everyone. And you can also find us on this website. So thanks for paying attention to my series. I hope you learned something about copyright and that you understand more how the rules work. And I'll put some links in the description to this talk if you want to have a look at that. And don't forget to check out part 1 and 2. Okay, bye.